Uh, this is Resonant Theming for greater emotional impact in board game design. And let's start with who we are and sort of how we come at board game design, it just philosophically. Eric, do you want to go first?
Sure, yeah. I am Eric Slauson. I'm a card and board game designer. I mostly work on party games. That's kind of my personal passion. A lot of them have an art or a creative focus. Just for speaking of philosophy, which we'll talk on a little bit later. But if you want to know more about me, you can follow me on Twitter at Slauson Designs, Slauson. And yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Kathleen, do you want to?
My name
introduce yourself.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
It said my mic was okay. Good. Sorry, it said my mic was cutting out. My name is Kathleen Mercury. I am a middle school gifted teacher, and I've been teaching game design to kids for about 13 years. So for me as a game designer, I like games that are as much fun to play as they are to win. And so for me, a lot of my games tend to fall in that 45-minute, because that's how long my classes are with students, and I play test with them a ton. Games where like thematically they have to really grab kids, but mechanically I want them to make sense. And so that's what I like to do for the games that I make.
Shipp, and I am a professional scenic painter, and so I approach game design from a very sort of theatery design. The design and sort of game, getting it to become a product in the world thing, to me seems like just as much a collaborative art project as theater. And playing is a very interactive entertainment sort of genre that I feel overlaps a lot with where my professional experience lies. So that's sort of my approach to game design. I have 2 signed designs, but they're not available yet. And so hopefully you'll hear more from me soon in that regard. So let's talk about what resonance is. This, if you look up resonance in the dictionary, this is actually pretty close to what it says. But I define resonance as game themes that have depth, shape, clarity. They don't fall flat. They don't feel amorphous or muddy. In other words, when someone hears the hook of your game, they go, because they get it. Mm-hmm. It resonates within another person when you tell them about your game. And we want to talk today about how to make games more that way. But do either of you, is that a pretty good definition, or do you want to add to that first?
I love that gasp definition. As a designer that focuses a lot on feeling and the feeling I can get out of people who are playing my game. I like that a definition that it doesn't use words, it uses a gasp. But yeah, I think the only thing that I would add is accuracy, I guess, as far as the theme, whether that's a feeling that you're trying to get across, or maybe even working with an IP theme or something, making sure that if you're going for a specific theme, that it feels accurate to the people you're tailoring it towards. So that's, I think, part of resonance is that that accuracy. I think you mentioned clarity.
And matching the expected experience with the actual played experience. Yeah, right. I have some more notes about that too. But yeah, totally.
Yeah, so that's a great definition.
Well, what I was going to say is it makes me think back to when I was first starting to game, and there was a game that was brought out called Primordial Soup. And like I said, this is probably like 14 years ago. This is a game that probably doesn't come around too much. But it was like about bacteria and poop. And I was like, this is my jam. I like weird stuff. Like, this is cool. And then they opened up the box, and the board is just like a blue grid, like a 4x4 grid, and there are these like little hexagons with sticks that you like slide beads on to like represent like, I guess, collecting or whatever it was. And for me, I was excited about the idea, like what the game box was selling. And now, granted, this is components, and there's a whole other, that's a whole other thing, but maybe it isn't. But I just felt so disappointed by what the game actually was, a square grid with hexagons and sticks. And honestly, it could be a great game, and I could be ridiculous, which is probably true too. But I immediately lost interest in playing the game because what I was hoping for was not what it was at least immediately presenting to me. And it's like, I don't know that I could really see how this is about poop and all this other stuff. And then later I went and looked the game up, and people did all these really cool, like, custom like Fimo things to really try to make it evoke the theme. But what the game was promising and what it was delivering, at least on my initial impression, was disappointing. And I think when it comes to the disconnect when we don't achieve that resonance is like when when the art is good, when it works, it's great. You don't notice it when it doesn't work. And that's when the gears grind. That's when we have that sort of friction. And I think that's that point where players sort of struggle to accept what it is that we're selling.
Sure. That really moves quite smoothly into my next point with
like it's like poop.
Broad, yes.
Sorry. I'll be good.
Broad outline strokes, ways to create resonance. So some of this you basically already said. Mechanic, theme, alignment, ludonarrative harmony, if you will. But there's more than just that. I also have use of the theme to explain the why of gameplay. That helps create resonance. Mm-hmm. It's relatable to players on an emotional level, which is something that I've heard talked about a little bit in other panels so far this weekend, which made me really happy, and we're going to talk about it a little bit more. And also, it fills a void in the market, which I don't think is something you should design for, but it's lucky if you do it. I think you can't plan for that. But if you can, sometimes it's hard to do that on demand.
It's okay.
It is. Well, I think it is. But on the other hand, like, especially if you're working with a licensed property, and I've done some work with licenses and various things. And the most important thing that you can do is capture that experience very intently, with intention to capture that experience. So even if it's like I'm creating a game and I want to make something happen, that's great. But there are times when with the work that you're doing, you have to capture that. And you really have to drive hard into what is the experience I want them to have and then work backwards. Sometimes you can create a game starting from scratch and it has this experience that you necessarily wanted to get, or maybe we're was a surprise. But there are times where it's like, for this game to be successful, if I'm making a game about Snoopy or whatever, people have to feel like they're in Peanuts land. Like, there's no question. Mm-hmm. So you have to drive hard right into that, and you have to be able to narrow what is that experience first, and that has to drive what you're doing with every step of the design.
Oh yeah, totally. But I yes. But if you were approaching this as a new designer who probably doesn't have access to IPs just yet,
sure.
Then
yeah, I think are you thinking of you correct me if I'm kind of misunderstanding your point, but you're mentioning trying to design to fill a gap that you see it thematically. If we look at something like Wingspan, for example,
yes,
is explosive because it tapped into this bird watching nature thing that wasn't widely available. Part of its success is because it is a different theme and a different approach, but it's hard to do that on purpose, is what you're saying. Yeah.
Well, so with Wingspan, it wasn't the first bird game out there or the first pretty bird game. There's Peepmots, which is much smaller, but it's also a bird card game that's gorgeous. So I'm just it's difficult, and I don't think that should be the foundation for why you're designing. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Oh no, I agree. But and I love Wingspan and I love Elizabeth. But one thing you could probably argue though is Wingspan ultimately really isn't about birds. I mean, it's a pretty kind of abstract engine builder game. You know, you could substitute a whole lot of different themes into it and it would play really well, in part because it's a well-designed game. You know, I'm not trying to diminish it in any way, shape, or form, but if we're going to try to like, you know, kind of nudge into what are we talking about here, you know, does Wingspan really offer a bird driven experience, you know?
Yeah, I think. Hey, this is a whole tangent, but as far as themes that resonate with people, I think there are one of the interesting things about that game is that I would say it works on both levels. If you are just playing it as an abstract, or you're like, oh, this is pretty art, you know, whatever, it functions very well, obviously, on that level. But I think once they really leaned into that bird theme, a lot of the mechanics are tied into that. So like the way the birds work is similar to their actual, you know, behavior and nature, and there's a lot of like work that they do as far as the interaction between the cards to make things, if you know the birds and if you are like reading the little facts at the bottom or whatever, you're like, oh, of course this steals a card because they steal eggs from somebody else's nest or whatever. So I think it works on both levels.
I love that, of course. I love that. Of course, that's how the rules work. I would say it's probably 50-50 for me with Wingspan. I think in the details, it's very thematic, but in the overall game arc, it's less so, which happens a lot in traditional board game design. So I am in a place where I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing, but I am saying that I think we have a path forward to get to a new place in this art form that we're still developing.
Cool.
Well, and certainly, like, you know, going back to Wingspan one more time, you know, the theme, because it was so different than other types of engine building games, definitely tapped into that audience that were interested in, you know, either everything from people who are super into birds, like the Audubon Society's got, you know, tons of people into this game, right? But also, you know, people wanting just something different than just like, I'm building up my civilization, I'm building up my castle, I'm, you know, a lot of different themes that you could theoretically, you know, just swap it out for. At the end of the day, it's birds, and it's kind of audacious to pick something like birds like that and have it be, you know, sellable in the marketplace. I mean, because one of my games was bird themed, just, and this doesn't really have but was basically, we switched it to dragons because even though they're basically flying chickens or whatever, and those are still birds, you know, dragons are seen as more sellable on the market, you know. And so I think there's something to be said about, you know, when it comes to resonance, the personal experience, when it comes to what like we as humans identify with and what matters to us and what becomes important. And when we find games that present that match that, then that's something we want to engage with.
Yeah.
Sure.
Corresponding, you mentioned knowing your audience, and I think that ties in here. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, part of all of this comes somewhat with a grain of salt, depending on what pathway you see your game taking. Whether this is something you're self-publishing and you can put whatever theme you want on it, and you know you're making the game you want to make, or if this is something that you're going to pitch to a publisher. Because if that is the case, then obviously you want to put your best foot forward and really think about the theme that you think works with the game, but keep it in the back of your mind that they might want to switch it from birds to dragons or something like that. So really, to Sarah, your point, you know, the mechanics still have to be there. You know, you don't rely on your theme to be the whole thing necessarily. Sometimes that works, but it definitely makes it harder to pitch to a larger audience. So I will say that to start. But yeah, knowing your audience, you know, I mentioned IP earlier. Obviously, if you're designing for a specific fan base, you better really know that IP and what the fans like about that thing. But that also applies to whatever theme you're working with. So, like for tattoo stories, for example, when I was designing that from the get-go, I didn't want it to be something that like made fun of tattoos, because I wanted it to be for a game for people who love tattoos, who love being able to talk about their tattoos and the stories behind them, and oh, why'd you have that, and oh, I love the design, and all that kind of stuff. So knowing it was for that community, I was really careful about the way that I, tweaked the rules and the language that I use on the cards. And so there are some like little jabs at some silly things that people commonly get tattoos of. But I did a lot of research into tattoo culture, looking for common themes of what makes a good tattoo artist. Why does one get famous versus another one? And some of it is technical skill, obviously, like this person is better at drawing or whatever, but a lot of tattoo artists get really famous because of the way they meld two ideas together, or the way that they have this like artistic voice. You can like look at a tattoo and be like, oh, that was done by so and so. And so yeah, I really tried to think about, if I want this to be, obviously it's a party game and I wanted it to be mass market, so I want it to be for everyone. But in the way that I wanted it to be for tattoo fans, I wanted it to be for artists, and I wanted it to be for people who can't draw. Each of those I had to keep in mind all the time, to make sure that each of those people got what they were wanting. Or I think in my case, Kathleen, you were talking about looking at a box and saying like, ooh, I hope this, I hope this is true about this game, or I think it's going to be about this. For that game, I think I was working on the opposite direction, where it was kind of like an uphill battle. I thought like it's a drawing game, so I know that people are like, oh, I can't draw. And so my job is to, by playing with the theme and playing with the mechanics, kind of reverse those expectations, or to make sure that to break those expectations. If you have tattoos and it's like, oh, this is this game about tattoos, they're going to be making fun of tattoos, or you're going to be drawing, whatever, and then you play it and you see, how much it really celebrates the culture and everything. So kind of a roundabout way to say, think about who you're really making it for. And even in the case of making something hopefully to be a mass market party game, on paper it should be for everyone, because you're trying to reach the largest audience. But there should definitely be some specific, to use a clinical term, demographics that you're really hoping to hook.
Your core experience, you also have your core audience, the people who are going to get the most excited about it. Right. And what you were describing just now sounds a lot like, taking the time to add depth and clarity, like we were saying before, to your theme and your game. So if you guys don't mind, I want to go through a few tools that I think are useful for anybody to take a theme maybe they already have that they're working on for a game, and to make it more resonant. And just to, not bury the lead, those tools are plot, location, time, and character. For plot, your game objective should align with your theme. Like, the goal of your game should match your theme. Sheriff of Nottingham does this very well, I think, if you need a good example. A lot of Euros don't do this that well. The theme of the game, like when you read the rules lore, it's like there's some people battling, and then you're playing a farming simulator, and I'm like, these don't match at all. The actions in your plot should further the actions of your game should further the narrative arc that you say the game is about. Include universal experiences, things that are, common to humans. And you can add meaning and subtext instead of adding more fantasy lore to your world. So, you could write a 6-page short story about the history of your world, or you can say things like, this character and this character, they're brothers. People understand that on an emotional level more than they're going to understand the cosmology of your world. Location, just make sure that people know what they're doing, where they are, and when we get to a character, who they are. Like, you're going to add that clarity to your game, and if people can latch onto it and understand it, it's going to help. You obviously, you can't, if you're pitching it to a publisher, this is not all in your control, but location can be expressed in illustration, how characters move, the game physics. I'm thinking walking in Burano, where you have to pay attention to gravity, even though it's a 2D game. It's sitting flat on the table, but gravity is a mechanic in the game. You can't build a floating roof over nothing else. Sushi Roll's conveyor belt mechanic gives you a sense of place, even though it's a fairly abstract game. It's less abstract than Sushi Go is because it's got those little conveyor belts. And to me, that's more resonant when I just look at the game. If I didn't know either of them, if I hadn't already played one and owned it and been like, do I really need the other one? But just coming at it straight, I would have obviously gone with Sushi Roll, because to me, it's more interesting. Time. The advancement of the gameplay should align with the time scale. So if it's a real-time game, you're not playing this huge epic that involves generations. If it's a campaign game, you can have a character die and people move on to a new character. But the time should make sense in terms of the real time that people experience a session of your game or an entire play of your game. And different scales produce different experiences. So Civ games, you expect a different experience out of than, again, short, light games. Individual people are more empathetic than collectives. So I don't think that Terraforming Mars is a terribly resonant game because you play corporations. I respect people who might not agree with that, but that's how I feel, because I respond better when I'm an individual character. Again, relationships can add depth, and I think that is hugely overlooked in board games. That, your NPC character, your bad guy in your Atoma could have some sort of relationship, and people understand, family relationships, friendships, betrayals on that level more than they're gonna latch on to the politics of a made-up world. And the last one is that character goals should align with your scoring goals. What your character wants and what your player wants should be similar. And I'll tell you, just to wrap this up, the game that I think does this the best and is one of the most resonant games I've ever played is a video game, Untitled Goose Game.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And if you're like, what's a real good example of a really resonant game? If you saw social media when this game first came out, it's the most resonant game. Everybody understands geese. Everybody understands small towns. Everybody wants to secretly cause innocent mayhem on some level. It's great. So that's sort of, those are my, these are tools if you're workshopping your theme and trying to figure out how you can make your components and your mechanics without, starting from scratch, how you can add stuff here and there to focus on the elements that will resonate, but, after a while you say that word over and over again. It's meaningless. So plot.
Well, I'm curious.
Location.
I have a game in mind for myself as far as, for me, the game that most delivers the experience I want. But Eric, what is, when we're talking about all this stuff, and so for Sarah said, the Untitled Goose Game, what would be the game that you would think of when it comes to this?
So for me, the thing that I things are firing off in my mind, and they're all co-ops, and I think part of that is because I keep as you're talking, I'm writing down notes, and everything that I want to like add or like, oh yeah, this is whatever, keeps bringing me back to the RPG space, because I think obviously if you have a good DM or GM, they're doing a lot of this stuff in the background. They're building character links. They're giving you a really good sense of location. They're making sure they're watching the time so that you're not spending 2 hours of your night walking down the same street, whatever. Yes. So there's a lot of stuff that you can learn from the RPG space and the way that you support your narrative and your sense of place and time and character. But in the tabletop side, co-ops, I feel do a lot of that lifting as well, especially ones that are time based, because the one that I was immediately thinking of was Escape Curse of the Temple, which is in one side you're just throwing dice and everything's such a blur that you don't have time to really sit and appreciate the moving parts of what's going on. But it does feel like you are trying to get out of this crumbling temple. It feels like you're exploring corridors and opening doors. The way that you roll these dice, and there's on one side of the dice there's like skulls, and if a skull comes up you can't roll that die anymore, and you're trying to roll these as fast as possible. And there's a system where you can help somebody else by giving them like a golden skull, and a golden skull gets rid of 2 black skulls. So you have people like calling across the table like, I'm locked, like somebody help me. And so somebody has to run across the board and be like, oh, here's a golden skull. And so you're literally running, to use your Sarah, your point about the way that the physics of your environment, you have to go from spot to spot to spot to spot to spot to get over here to physically give them a golden die, to get rid of the 2 black ones. So it does a lot of stuff with the sense of time, because it is 10 minutes. You have 10 minutes to get out before the cave collapses, and that's how long the game actually is. And there's not really like, oh, I'm your brother and she's our mom or whatever. Like there's that character piece isn't really
every element.
Yeah. But I think insofar as we know we are all Indiana Jones-esque type people, it really nails that feeling of him being chased by that boulder. And that's the whole game, is you being chased by this boulder, the stress of that moment. So yeah, I think that was the one I was thinking of.
I want to play that game so bad. I've heard people talk about it over the years, and it hasn't come my way yet, but I really want to play it.
It's fun.
What's your game, Kathleen?
I mean, for me, the game that, and I've talked about this in other podcasts and stuff too, so I probably, I don't know. I'm thinking should I get another game to talk about? But honestly, it always comes back to me. When you said Escape, I brightened up, but I actually Escape from Atlantis. And so with that game,
is that Survive?
Survive Escape from Atlantis. Thank you. It's late at night, ish. Anyway, but that game for me, absolutely, like, it's such a great alignment of theme and mechanics. Like everything that happens in that game makes sense. That this island is sinking, and so that means that pieces of the island tiles are removed every turn, and you've got way more people than you can try to help at once to simulate the panic of like, what are we going to do, how are we going to do this? You can do bad things to other people, or you could actually help them if you wanted to, but then there's just all the aspects of like, the monsters. There's 3 monsters in the game. is you're trying to move all your meeples from the main island to the safety islands. And everyone knows that sharks eat people, but they don't hurt boats. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that whales smash boats, but they don't hurt people. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that sea monsters destroy everything, but they're big and slow. Like, everybody knows this, right? And so, and then you have more people than you can save. And so sometimes you can try to plan on where you put all your people. Sometimes you just put all your people down and see what happens. And so, and then at the end, you reveal the point values on the bottom of your meeples. And so Eric might have gotten 5 meeples to shore. I might have 3, but if I had a higher point value, I would beat him because of the values underneath. And so what I think is really interesting is that's like one of my favorite games. And like for me, it's like the kind of game that I use is like sort of my model for what I want to create, because there's just so much else to it that I think is just brilliant. But when I was playing that with students, it's gotten some interesting reactions sometimes, because I had a student one time absolutely hated the fact that it wasn't basically a co-op. She's like, why would you not help other people if you're on an island that's about to explode? And then the fact that the people had different values, and some meeples were worth 1 and some meeples were worth 6. She absolutely hated that as well, just rejected that out of hand. And that was really surprising, because I mean, it's a silly little game, right? But it really made me think about that in terms of like the impact on games, especially when it's sort of unexpected. And so when I had an opportunity, I was asked by a publisher for my students to design an expansion to an existing co-op game. And I actually took Survive, taught it to the kids, they played it, and then I said, okay, now make this co-op. And so I wouldn't have probably thought about it had this student not have that experience. And so for her, it wasn't just, I get everything, I can play pretend, this is escape. Escape from my life. I'm not really, a bad person who would actually throw real people in front of sharks and stuff like that. It's okay to do it in the game. Haha, it's silly. And so I think there is that sort of like, when it comes to resonance, it's not just the game itself does everything you want, because there's some games out there, some pretty terrible themes. And like, while I get like what's happening and it might be a great game, it's not a game that I will play. Secret Hitler is a game where like you could, it's not historically accurate. Hitler never never pretended to be anything other than what he was. But but for some people, it's like, look, ignore the theme. It's a really good social deduction game. Totally is. But for me, it's just so distasteful thematically. Like, I won't play. I'll play Secret Voldemort. I'll play other Secret Sith. There's other like games out there that people have rethemed. Like, I'll play those. But when it comes to Secret Hitler, no, because the one time I played it, guess what role I had? And I was playing it with Europeans. Yeah. So I threw a German guy under the bus. And I won. Did not feel good. Didn't feel good. Didn't feel good. Didn't feel good. Hated it. Honestly. Never want to repeat that again.
Oh, for sure. That is a like completely whole different panel on subtext of theme and mechanics that is a lot.
And Sarah, you mentioned.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say one thing. You briefly mentioned that you don't have to have all of these at one time.
Right.
It's you don't have. This doesn't. Not all of these dials have to be all the way up to 10. And it's very hard to do that. And yes, these are just. I just wanted to throw that out there. Yeah, these are things to keep in mind and to maybe focus on and levers to pull and knobs to tweak, but you don't have to.
Yes, I want to, because Eric, we just met tonight. Yes. I think we might have like seen each other in passing in Facebook forums, but this is our first time really meeting. So I want to do an example with you using my game that was signed recently. So I'm going to give you the less resonant version first, which resembles the original version of the game, and then the fixed version. So how would you like to play a game where you are a European who is living in this sort of industrial or pre-industrial era, and you receive inheritance from a family member and you get more money, and then you're like, I want to get more inheritance, so you start killing off family members to get more inheritance over time. It's a little resonant.
Okay.
You get into the will of another family member and then you kill them off. That's kind of resonant. Okay, so how would you like, here's the other version. How would you like to play a game where you're a Victorian woman who kills your husband to marry a richer man?
Oh, all right. Now you got.
There you go.
No,
I didn't add that much. I didn't change that much. I changed the relationship between the player and the NPC.
Sure. Got a little Black Widow situation going on. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, a small shift in the not only the time period, but the relationship.
Victorian era.
Oh yeah.
So it's basically the same time period. The early version of the game was like started before and went through the industrial era, and now it's like very Victorian England because I kind of have made the game more historical, believe it or not, when I changed the theme. But yeah, that's a real example of how you can take an idea that's okay and then make it an idea that people go, well, almost every woman I've ever showed the game to goes, okay, where can I buy this? I'm like, well, it hasn't even been signed yet. Also, the mechanics aren't done, and you play it. It needs work.
Yeah, here's on. Yeah, that's interesting. Now, I'm curious. I have so many questions. So with a shift like that, well, I think any shift, and Kathleen, you can, as somebody who's had a theme changed, there's kind of this concept, on one side you've got like in for a penny, in for a pound, where it's like, okay, if we're gonna make this slightly darker, do we just like make you a serial killer, like, or because if you've shifted it enough, there's kind of a gray area where it's like, wait, this seems like wrong that she's doing this, but if you keep pushing to where it's like ridiculous or it's silly or it's baked in, you're like, oh, okay, I get it, it's tongue in cheek or whatever.
So a modern day setting of women killing their husbands has a very different feel than a Victorian setting. Just add there.
Yeah.
You can talk now.
So I was just curious, kind of where where that decision was made of like how dark to make it, or how where to find that balance.
Honestly, games are abstract, a lot of them, and until you add art, and so it takes a very light hand to add these details without going so far that you're trying too hard. And when I realized that my mechanical problems and my theme and mechanism misalignment would be fixed by making the player characters women getting married, I suddenly was like, oh no, and I know the title, and I know all the cards I need to add, and no publisher's ever going to want it with this theme, but I also know I'm never going to come up with anything better, even in subsequent games, because it's good and it works, but I also had to work very hard, and that's also a completely separate panel on how to push back when your playtesters are wrong, because they want you to change the core of your game. And that if you go too far that way, because some people will get excited about certain elements of your game that aren't marketable, or they are marketable, but they've been done before. And finding unique things that you can turn on your head is another way to create resonance, and it will end up feeling like it's filling a void in the market, whether it is or not.
So I guess my question is, in terms of talking about this, because one thing for me personally, playing a lot of games, and obviously a lot of the games I've been playing, since, I don't know, mid-March, have been online, And a lot of games that I've been playing online have been of the simpler sort of variety. And having found a new sort of like respect for Rainer Knizia style games, where it's a very clear, strong mechanic. There's a very clear like type of transaction relationship that you're trying to work with. And the theme themselves can be absolutely like pasted on. And so in playing these games, it's really for me about sort of like, celebrating the choices that I have as a player. And so the lack of resonance when it comes to like a pasted on theme, like one game that I've been playing a ton is Lost Cities because a friend of mine likes it a ton. And the theme is, other than the name Lost Cities, you'd never know anything other than we're playing with 5 different colors of cards, and that's it. Like that's the theme, colors. And so,
yes.
Yeah,
It's this game.
Yeah, it's great. It's it's super fun, and you could be a huge jerk about it, and it's great. And so when it comes to resonance in games, if you can have an amazing game experience with something that is so incredibly abstract, why does this matter? If somebody's wanting to design a game, why should they be focused on all of these different, like little tent poles, perspectives, tools to create resonance? Why shouldn't they just make the game they want to make or that they're trying to make?
That's a good question. I think, Sarah, you can go ahead.
I was going to say, first of all, you should make the game you're trying to make. But also what you're describing, especially with a perfected mechanics focus, is only one type of game experience. And I don't think it's the type that is ultimately going to broaden board games market share. I don't know that it's going to bring people in.
Well, in widening the market share and bringing people in, I think, are 2 different things. And I'm not trying to like split hairs here, or anything like that. But as far as if a game delivers a really good experience, and there's something to be said about a game where I don't need to explain this whole world that I'm in, like if I can just explain like because there are some games, like for example the game Radis, if you're familiar with Radis, it's about the Black Death moving across Europe, and you're trying to have as much of your population on the board at the end of the game represented by different little cubes and stuff like that. If you had to explain that game in abstract terms, people's heads would pop off and roll down the street, right? But because this game is like has this really fun theme. Fun, if you think Black Death is fun, but you know what I mean? It's got a really like a theme that draws people's attention. When you say this is a game about the Black Death, people are like, oh ho, allow me to walk in, then you can explain all of these rules in a way that adds context and lends itself to understanding. So even if they don't necessarily feel terror when the Black Death piece is like moved into their space, nevertheless, it becomes easier just to like teach the game, the different types of transactions, the different types of phases, all that other stuff. So I think there's levels when it comes to, from like basically an abstract with a pasted on theme all the way to something that is so incredibly immersive, like to the Gloomhaven like end of the spectrum in terms of experience for players. And I think that's an important thing to consider as well when it comes to what type of experience you're wanting to create for players, because I think you could pick any of those places on the spectrum, find validity there. I think the real secret here is you have to figure out what it is that you're actually wanting. That if you're trying to have Gloomhaven, but your game, doesn't, if you don't have that depth of theme, it's okay. That way you just have to like lean in and make your mechanics perfect, and offer something that's never been seen before.
Yeah, I think well, one, if you're watching this panel, it's probably because you're interested in theme in the first place. So you could always make a completely themeless incredible game like Shobu or something like a Bonanza, which I don't know if you've played that, but you're like trading beans and stuff. But like it could be anything. Some of my favorite games are just like nothing. So yeah, you can always go totally mechanics first, and then just put something on at the end if the mechanics are just great and incredible. And as you're saying, there's a spectrum there, but I think it pays to be prepared, I think, and to have some things in your back pocket if you have one of these games that could be anything, and you get it signed or whatever. Some publishers are kind of the type that take your game and then a year later it comes out and you don't see it between those 2 points, and some publishers are much more collaborative and want your input, and they will ask you, okay, well, this is kind of abstract, but what themes have you tried, or have you play tested different themes, or what do you think it might work? And I think it's beneficial to think about some things that might be marketable, at least to get those conversations going with a publisher. For Monstrosity, it was always drawing aliens as like a Men in Black sketch artist kind of thing. Like that's always kind of what it was. But we toyed around with like, oh, what if these are like wood etchings and you're making these like kind of demonic tomes like from I don't know, like the Necronomicon or whatever, or like what if it's in the future and you're traveling to different planets and you're like Charles Darwin and you're drawing the aliens that you see at each planet or whatever. And so we did fiddle with some different things, but this sketch artist concept we found was the most resonant, where we could just say, okay, you're a police sketch artist, but aliens. And people immediately get it. They know how we're going to play. They know why it's fun. They know why it's silly. They know how we're going to score without even really going into it. So, but those conversations, we still had those conversations. And in the process of having those conversations and thinking through why it had to be that, why it allowed us to make the good parts of the game better. So even if I would argue that if you, in the process of thinking about something to paste on to something, you might realize that, oh, what if there was this mechanic? Or like, oh, now that it's dogs, what if you can bury something and save it later? Or if it's dragons, what if like there's fire involved now, and that kind of stuff. So I think there's no harm in thinking about it, even if you know that this is going to be a dry Euro or this is just going to be a card game. Because I would be curious if something like The Crew, which has a sci-fi theme. We're on the ship and we're trying to do these. Each round has a different mission and a whole backstory of what's going on with the ship and what's happening with the space crew. It's a trick taker at heart. So I would be very curious if they design the trick taker first, and here's the twist, and it's a co-op trick taker, and they just played that a whole bunch of times, and then just put space on it, or if they kind of came up together and if one informed the other. If they landed on space and were like, oh, now we need an anti-gravity level, now we need a space virus level, now we need the solar panels to be gone, and that if you've played The Crew, I don't remember how many missions there are. There's like 50 or 150 or something crazy.
There's a lot.
Yeah, they are informed. The mechanics are informed by the theme of that mission. Oh, this person is now quarantined with a space virus, so now we have to skip them every round, like or whatever. When we're playing our cards. So I think the two can inform each other. I don't. Just like the tools there that you mentioned, it doesn't have to be all one thing or another thing. It doesn't have to be either pasted on or incredibly integrated. Kathleen, to your point, it's just figure out where on that spectrum is the sweet spot.
Yeah. Well, Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tim.
Well, and so in thinking about this, I get super fussy when a game like purports to present something thematically.
You, Kathleen.
Yeah, I know, right? And then it doesn't deliver on that, and especially when it comes to like a Euro or something like that, when there's like the game Tricerion is a big monster game. There's like worker placement, 80,000 people do it. I remember I was so overwhelmed when I played that game that I did the bare minimum. I put on my magic shows and I just kept repeating actions, and luckily I won because I didn't overbuild that I couldn't like sustain. You know what I mean? I was just like the little point engine that could, and that was it. And so even with all of this stuff going on, and just like fundamentally, I was just kind of doing that one play ritual like over and over and over again. I was okay with the fact that there was 80,000 decisions, not my jam. Okay with it. But the one thing is there's the part where you take like the little tiles, and they have like the little like designs on them, and you have to like create little patterns with tiles. And I just thought that makes no sense. I can totally see sending out your workers to get the stuff to put on, and to me, that was the most gamery kind of like they came up with this cool puzzle thing and they wanted to use it somehow. It was so like added on to me. I didn't understand what the benefit of it was, like for scoring or whatever. Like it didn't seem to make sense to me in this world that they were building. I was okay with being overwhelmed by 80,000 different places because I could totally see where game wise you would really try to like build a magnificent engine, to do that. But for me, it was just that one thing that I was just like, why, and in speaking about retheming, going from, pigeons pooping on people to dragons. Ooh, I turned off my video. There's my hand. So from pigeons pooping on people to dragons firebombing villages, first thing I did was, okay, boom. Now let's officially dragons. Same pieces, same everything. Didn't work. Yeah. Didn't make sense anymore, because dragons don't live in cities and my board is 3-dimensional. There are buildings everywhere. And so in working through so many different things, then it's like, well, obviously there need to be like mountains on the outside of this village, so all the buildings got pushed to the edges, and the actions that you take, there used to be 2 dexterity actions, now there's 4, all the different ways I had to play with it. Now it's scenario based, so I jokingly call it Gloomhaven meets Flick 'em Up. It's fine. It's Dragon Rock Colossal Games, hopefully 2021. But that's the thing, like when you're retheming a game, like if it really is something where you can just pay something on, and it is pretty removed from like reality. But if you want it to be real, want it to feel real, I want people to feel like a dragon. And if there's one last thing I'll say is when I have my students play test with each other, when I'm play testing and there's questions, there's 4 things that like 4 parts called the wink. And it's like what works in the game. 4 things that I want them to find out from others when they're play testing, or to think about themselves. What works in the game? What needs improvement? That's the I. What new ideas do other people have to give you, especially for my students? They want to tell you. But the Q is questions. And the more developed they get as designers, then they can come up with their own questions, especially when they're actually trying to look for something. But in the beginning, the first question is, did you feel like a pirate? If the game is about piracy, did you feel like a dragon? If you didn't feel like a dragon, what would make you feel more like a dragon? It's like that type of getting people's feedback as far as matching the experience that they're expecting versus what you're delivering is so important to really hone in from the beginning, because it's like, well, pirates drank a lot of rum and there's no rum in the game. And it might be something you're like, oh, I think I do need maybe I want to make rum the actual resource, and then that could turn into a whole thing because they drink the rum. Then they might take crazy actions, as opposed to just like logical actions, and whatever. Like you can have all kinds of fun with it because hey, it's rum, but you don't get that necessarily unless you ask sometimes. So there you go.
Thank you. We will wrap it up. That is the downside of highly thematic games, is that when there's a mismatch, it is very obvious. And people will latch onto it. So that's where tweaking your theme is something that's can be very useful, or tweaking your mechanics to, bring all of that into better harmony. So let's I guess, any final thoughts first? Any last advice?
Well, Sarah, you said you're a scenic painter.
Yes.
So like in like a theater backdrop, is that what I'm thinking?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I
So
paint walls and floors. Basically, I can't do game art.
A lot of this carries over into other art forms, like in theater, you can definitely, I have been to plays where there was just a chair in the middle of the stage, and I was crying by the end of the play or whatever, just because of the way it was directed, or the power of the performances. And that's something that would equate to this dry Euro. There's no dressing on it, but it's the power of the mechanics, the way people are interacting with each other, that is powerful. Or you can have something like The Lion King, where a Broadway production where things are really thematic. Those are animals, like I'm really on the Serengeti or whatever, and that carries its own power. So you can see this in music. How instrumental you want your song to be, a cappella, or you have 30 people, a 30-person band, backing you. It's really, make the art that you want to make. But I will be somewhat of the voice of reason that there is a business side of things. So a lot of these things we're just telling you to keep in mind for one, marketability, two, ease of pitching to publishers, to help them to see what the game could be, with a little bit more work, and finding an audience, which kind of works with all of that. So make the game you want to make, but some of these things make it easier to get it actually out there to a lot of people. So that's what I'll say.
Yeah, I would just real quick, I would say be able to distill down like who or what your game serves. When it comes to, you're not going to be able to do everything, whatever. What does this game serve? Who is this, like the God that this game serves, however you want to phrase it, but basically be very, very clear about what the game is and the experience that you're delivering, and just always keep thinking that in your mind, is this hitting what is my game doing what I wanted to serve, who I wanted to serve? Figure that out. Reword it better, get back to me, but you know what I mean.
And Sarah,
small games can still have resonant themes. Basically, every board game I mentioned tonight was a smaller game that had a resonant theme, because of small details. You don't have to add a ton to make it just feel right. Really, really quickly, I am Sarah Shipp, and if you want to find me, I am in design groups on Facebook, or if you're not into design, join the Cats with Backpacks Facebook group. That's my other, one of my games was signed. That's a line of games, but I will be in that group. Or my blog, shipboardgames.blogspot, I'll put it in here, and I'll be in the Discord afterwards. You guys go ahead, and if you want to say where you're findable.
KathleenMercury.com. All my game design teaching resources are available for free. KathleenMercury.com.
And I am at Slauson Designs on Twitter and Instagram. SLAUSON Designs. You can find Tattoo Stories on Amazon, your local game store, Target, and Monstrosity is coming out at the end of this month.
Who's publishing it?
You can still pre-order it. Deepwater Games. So nice. You can pre-order it from their website, and you get a free expansion right now for the next week or so. So, you can hop on that. And I just want to say thanks again. This is really fun and great conversation.
Yeah. I'll be over in the Discord. Good night, you guys.
Night.